When I think about the Middle Ages, it's easy to picture a world filled with brave knights, noble heroes, and stories of honor and chivalry. But the truth was a whole lot darker and far more unforgiving than those legends make it seem. Back then, the average person was lucky to live anywhere between 30 and 40 years, and countless people never even made it out of childhood. If I managed to survive those early years, I still had to face a constant stream of dangers that no prayer, lucky charm, or old folk remedy could truly protect me from. Death seemed to be waiting around every corner, ready to strike without warning. So, let's step back through history together and explore some of the harsh and tragic ways people in the medieval world lost their lives. When I look back at the Middle Ages, it feels like nearly every kingdom was fighting someone. Wars broke out everywhere, with invasion after invasion from groups like the Vikings, the Normans, and later the Mongols. Some of the biggest conflicts of the era included the Crusades, the Wars of the Roses, and the 100 Years' War. Even though we call it the 100 Years' War, it actually lasted around 116 years. The shorter name just stuck, even if it wasn't completely accurate. That long struggle dragged the kings of England and France into one of the most destructive wars of the medieval period. During the early 1400s, while the 100 Years' War was still raging, the city of Paris found itself under siege. Much of what we know about those difficult years comes from an anonymous writer known as the Bourgeois of Paris, who carefully recorded the hardships that the people of the city experienced between 1405 and 1449. Many historians believe he may have been a priest connected with the University of Paris. His writings didn't just focus on life inside the capital. He also paid close attention to the chaos spreading throughout France as a bitter civil war erupted between the Armagnac faction of the House of Orléans and the House of Burgundy. Their violent rivalry repeatedly spilled into the streets of Paris, reaching a horrifying peak during the Armagnac massacre of 1418. Somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people are believed to have been killed. The chronicler described how armed men dragged people into the streets and slaughtered them without mercy, no matter who they were or whether they had already surrendered. Heavy axes and other weapons were used as the executions continued throughout the city. He wrote that nearly everyone seemed to be carrying some kind of weapon, and as people walked past the bodies lying in the streets, many struck them again even after they were already dead. Women, children, and elderly bystanders shouted insults at the victims, calling them filthy traitors and saying they deserved an even worse fate. According to his account, there wasn't a major street in Paris that escaped the bloodshed. The bodies were stripped almost immediately after death. In only a few moments before someone could even walk a short distance, the dead had been robbed of everything except their trousers. Their corpses were piled together in the muddy streets like stacks of butchered meat. The chronicler called it a truly dreadful sight. He recorded that at least 522 men were killed in the streets that day by swords and other weapons, not including those murdered inside homes and buildings. As terrible as the massacre was, the people of Paris found one small reason to be thankful. The chronicler noted that a heavy rainstorm fell that night, washing away much of the blood. By morning, he wrote, the bodies showed little more than dried, clotted blood because the rain had cleaned their wounds so thoroughly that there was almost no foul smell. In general, living inside a fortified city was usually safer than staying out in the open countryside during wartime. Even so, everyday life was filled with fear no matter where I lived. Simply being an innocent civilian offered no real protection. Food supplies often disappeared, famine became a constant threat, and many people slowly starved. If an army happened to march through my village, there was a good chance everything I owned would be destroyed. Soldiers rarely spared ordinary people, and non-combatants often suffered just as much as those carrying weapons. One of the most common military tactics during the 100 Years' War was the chevauchée, a destructive raid designed to cripple the enemy. Entire villages were looted and burned to the ground, not because they were military targets, but because destroying homes, crops, and livestock weakened both resources and morale. Although this strategy became closely associated with the late Middle Ages, it had been used long before, including during William the Conqueror's campaign after his invasion of England in 1066. War wasn't only devastating for civilians. If I found myself on the battlefield, my chances of survival were never guaranteed. Swords, arrows, and other weapons left terrible wounds that surgeons attempted to treat with red-hot irons or crude cauterization. When limbs were too badly damaged, they were amputated without any form of anesthesia. Whether I survived often depended more on luck than on skill or medical care. Infection was almost expected after a serious wound, and once a fever began to rise, it usually meant that death wasn't far behind. Growing up in the Middle Ages was incredibly dangerous, and simply making it to adulthood was never guaranteed. Nearly 1 out of every 4 children died before reaching the age of 5, and the risks started the moment they were born. Childbirth itself was extremely dangerous. Caesarean sections were generally performed only when the mother was already close to death, and if labor became difficult, midwives had little to depend on besides experience, educated guesses, and desperate prayers. Even if I survived those first few years, life was still expected to be short. After making it through infancy and childhood, most peasants were fortunate if they lived beyond their mid-40s. Diseases that many people today recover from without much trouble, such as scarlet fever, measles, mumps, and whooping cough, were often deadly during the medieval period. People even believed that teething itself could kill a child. Because of that belief, some caregivers tried treatments like cutting into a baby's gums, hoping it would ease the pain. Instead, those crude procedures often introduced dangerous infections, making an already risky stage of childhood even more hazardous. It's important to remember that this was a world without antibiotics, vaccines, or modern medicine. Something as small as a scratch or a minor cut could quickly become fatal if it became infected. For many families, having lots of children wasn't simply a personal choice, it was a matter of survival. Parents sadly expected that not every son or daughter would live long enough to reach adulthood because everyday life itself was filled with deadly risks. Long before anyone understood bacteria or viruses, people had no real idea what actually caused disease. When I think about the crowded medieval towns where so many people lived, it's no surprise that illness spread so easily. City officials did try to enforce sanitation rules, but they believed that disease traveled through foul-smelling air rather than invisible germs. Since bad air usually came from filthy surroundings, they focused on cleaning up the smells instead of addressing the true causes of infection. The streets often served as open sewers. Animals wandered freely wherever they pleased, while personal hygiene ranged from poor to practically non-existent. Although local authorities attempted to improve public health, conditions were often so bad that their efforts barely made a difference. One royal document from England shows just how terrible things had become. In the calendar of close rolls during the reign of Edward III in 1332, the king complained to the mayor and bailiffs of York about the unbearable stench filling the city. He described the streets and lanes as being clogged with dung, manure, filth, and every kind of waste. Concerned for the health of both the residents and those traveling to Parliament, he ordered the officials to thoroughly clean every street before the feast of St. Andrew and to keep them that way afterward. Today, it's easy to understand how those filthy, foul-smelling conditions helped diseases spread. Illnesses like typhoid, tuberculosis, pneumonia, the sweating sickness, and the dreaded plague found perfect conditions to thrive. Once someone became sick, however, there was very little they could do to fight the disease. Medieval medicine was based largely on ideas inherited from ancient Greek physicians. Doctors believed the body contained 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and they blamed nearly every illness on an imbalance between them. To restore that balance, they prescribed treatments that now seem bizarre, including bloodletting, purging, and all kinds of strange mixtures and potions. To be fair, not every medieval remedy was useless. Some herbal medicines and traditional treatments, developed through generations of practical experience, probably offered real benefits. Unfortunately, many other so-called cures were far more dangerous than the diseases themselves. Substances like mercury and arsenic were commonly used as medicines, while lead-based cosmetics were considered perfectly acceptable. If I had enough money to hire a physician, there was a very real chance that the treatment I received would leave me in even worse condition than when I first became ill. Even the smallest injury could turn into a fight for survival. Wounds that most people today would barely think twice about were capable of becoming life-threatening. Without antiseptics, sterile bandages, stitches, or any understanding of bacteria, infections spread with frightening speed. There were no tetanus vaccinations or reliable ways to stop contamination. A simple fall from a wagon or a small cut while threshing grain could easily develop into gangrene, sepsis, and, before long, death. Finding enough food during the Middle Ages was never something I could take for granted. The food supply was fragile, and a single poor harvest could push entire communities towards starvation. If one growing season failed because of relentless storms, drought, or swarms of insects, hunger quickly became a harsh reality. With very little food being imported and only limited stores of salted meat or grain, which were constantly threatened by rot and rats, people lived with the constant fear that their next meal might not come. That fear became a terrible reality during the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, which devastated much of northern Europe. Heavy rains fell season after season, destroying crops before they could be harvested. Vast numbers of livestock died, and grain reserves slowly disappeared until there was almost nothing left to eat. Sadly, this wasn't the only famine the medieval world had to endure. In his Chronicle of the Scottish Nation, John of Fordun wrote that during the famine of 1310, the people of Scotland became so desperate that they survived by eating the flesh of horses and other animals they normally considered unclean. The suffering grew even worse elsewhere. According to records from 1317, people in Ireland were so overwhelmed by hunger that they dug up the bodies of the dead from cemeteries, stripped flesh from their skulls, and ate it. Some accounts even claimed that mothers, driven beyond the limits of human endurance, resorted to eating their own children in order to survive. Meanwhile, in Dublin, food became so scarce and expensive that even families who had once been financially secure were reduced to begging in the streets. Many people simply couldn't afford to buy food anymore, and countless others died from starvation. England faced its own horrifying reports as well. Contemporary chroniclers claimed that some desperate people kidnapped children and ate them. Whether every account was completely accurate is impossible to know, but the stories reveal just how terrifying those years of famine were. The English chronicler John Trocolo of St. Albans Abbey described how hunger and disease quickly became inseparable. He wrote that many people developed a severe illness after eating spoiled food. According to his account, the sickness weakened nearly everyone who caught it, often leading to high fevers or serious throat infections. People died after being poisoned by rotten food, and livestock suffered the same fate, collapsing and dying alongside their owners. Modern historians believe the disease John described was most likely ergotism, a poisoning caused by eating grain infected with a toxic mold. During the Middle Ages, people called the illness St. Anthony's fire. It claimed countless lives and usually began with agonizing muscle spasms, terrifying hallucinations, and, in many cases, gangrene that slowly destroyed parts of the body. During the Middle Ages, punishment was a constant threat, and even innocent people weren't always safe from it. Justice was often unforgiving, especially if I happened to be poor or had no one powerful to defend me. In many places, guilt or innocence wasn't decided by solid evidence, but by bizarre trials known as ordeals. A person might be tied up and thrown into a pond or river. If they floated, it was taken as proof that they were guilty, and they could be pulled out only to face execution. If they sank, they were declared innocent, but by then they had often drowned. Even minor offenses could end with a death sentence. Public punishments were designed not only to punish the accused, but also to frighten everyone watching. People were locked in the stocks, branded with hot irons, whipped in front of crowds, or hanged where everyone could see. Since there was no organized national police force, justice frequently depended on rumors, local rivalries, and whoever held influence in the community. Being accused of witchcraft or heresy was especially dangerous. Because the Catholic Church held enormous authority, anyone found guilty of heresy could be sentenced to death, most famously by being burned alive. Allegations of witchcraft often fell on elderly women, widows, or people known for using herbal remedies. A person didn't need to own a spellbook or perform strange rituals to become a suspect. A neighbor's failed harvest, a dead farm animal, or even an old personal grudge could be enough to bring terrible accusations. The trials themselves offered little hope of a fair outcome. Defending yourself was extremely difficult, and confessions were often forced through torture. Once someone admitted guilt, whether the confession was true or not, the conviction was celebrated as proof that justice had been served. Fire was another ever-present danger during medieval life. With candles, open hearths, timber-framed buildings, and thatched roofs, towns were incredibly vulnerable to disaster. During the hot summer months, roofs became dry enough to ignite with a single spark, while floors covered in straw or rushes only made the flames spread faster. Entire neighborhoods could disappear in a matter of hours because there was no fire brigade to stop the blaze. London experienced several devastating fires throughout the medieval period. One of the earliest recorded accounts appears in the Book of Ancient Laws, written in 1274. It describes a massive fire that destroyed the Church of St. Mary Overy, the bridge and its chapel, along with a large section of the city itself. Everyday accidents were just as deadly. There were no workplace safety regulations, and dangerous jobs claimed countless lives. Many stonemasons fell from high scaffolding while helping construct the magnificent Gothic cathedrals that still stand today. Water was another silent killer. Very few people knew how to swim, and many drowned while fishing, collecting water, or simply washing clothes along the riverbank. Throughout the Middle Ages, death was never far away. Disease, accidents, war, hunger, violence, or unfair justice could end a person's life without warning. Survival depended as much on luck as it did on strength or determination. By understanding how people lived and how easily they died, we gain a much deeper appreciation for just how different their world was from ours. It reminds us that everyday survival was once uncertain, and every new day was far from guaranteed. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. If you enjoyed spending this time with me, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Your support and engagement genuinely help us continue making these videos. I upload a brand new episode every Friday, so don't forget to click the notification bell to make sure you never miss the next one. If you'd like even more medieval history, I've also launched a Patreon where I post an extra exclusive video every month. There are already several bonus videos waiting for you there if you'd like to check them out. And, finally, a huge thank you to all of our higher-tier patrons whose names are on the screen right now. Your support plays a direct role in making these videos possible, and I truly appreciate every one of you. Thanks again for watching, take care, and, as always, I'll see you next week.